Kelly Blanchard is a continuous term lecturer in economics. She's been part of our faculty since 1998. She regularly teaches large lecture classes with more than 1,000 students in a given semester, and she's incredibly effective, being inducted last year as an associate in the Purdue Teaching Academy, which recognizes outstanding and scholarly teaching throughout the university. She was also voted by Purdue students as one of the top professors on the entire campus in an annual poll conducted by our student newspaper. Kelly, what's the most important part of being a good teacher?
The most important part of it, you mean things that make you a good teacher?
Yeah.
I always think that's a hard question to answer because the easiest answer to me is when you see the results in your students. If you have students who are learning, then I think that necessarily defines you as a good teacher. The hardest part, though, is defining what characteristics I think get you there. I think, first of all, you honestly have to like the people you're teaching.
Okay.
And I know sometimes, especially in large lectures, when you're teaching many people at a time, there are some people who may not necessarily be as engaged. As
Well,
you would like.
yeah, I can imagine. So when you're in that large lecture format, how do you maintain interest and attention?
Well, one of the things that I try to do is I try to make sure that they have a very clear idea of what we're going to do for the day, so that there's a plan. They know sort of what to expect. They know the process that we're going to go through. And one of the things I like to do is, rather than using PowerPoint slides, which I know a lot of professors use, I actually write down my notes on a document camera. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from students about doing that because it keeps them doing something in the class, which is helpful. And then I like to use a lot of stories in class. So some of them are personal stories. And I think including those in what I would call sort of a standard traditional lecture gives them a little bit of a break, right? There's a period of time where, I don't necessarily have to write down this story about her anniversary trip to Michigan, but it's something that reinforces the material and keeps them engaged.
So you mentioned the document camera. Are there other pieces of technology you use to be more effective?
Definitely. I was going to mention a second thing that I do is a few years ago, I started incorporating a Purdue developed program called Hot Seat, which allows you to ask questions during class, and then students can respond to those questions, kind of like with clickers, but they just use their cell phones to respond to it. And the thing I like about it is, as a Purdue student, you're already in the system, so you don't have to buy a clicker, you don't have to register for anything new, you're just automatically in there. And that does two things. One is, when I finish a topic, it allows me to make sure that students are with me, that they're still following what I've been talking about. I usually take questions from old exams, and I basically put them up on the screen as part of the hot seat question. And I always pick questions that were really hard, that were missed a lot on the previous semester. And so then I can monitor and say, okay, well, let's see what you guys are answering. Usually 4 choices, A, B, C, or D. And then I can say, okay, well, it looks like most of you are picking answer B, which is great because that's the right answer. So let's just go over it quickly and move on. Or I can say, it looks like most of you are picking answer B, but that's not actually the right answer.
So that's interesting because, if you think about small classes and you're getting feedback, and a lot of times the conversation might be dominated by 1 or 2 students, and you really don't have, in any sense, a statistical sample of what the learning in the classroom's like.
Yeah, definitely. In a large class, I look for facial cues of, I don't really understand what you just said, or nodding heads and things like that. But in those large classes, I really don't know what they're getting until I give them an exam. And at that point, it's too late because they've just taken the exam. So that is a piece of technology that I especially like. I also want to mention a second piece of technology, which is I typically have 3 large lecture sections. So my first lecture is always recorded on Boilercast, which is a recording system in the classroom that records both the input that I am writing on the document camera, as well as audio of my voice. And then I post links to that up on our learning management system, Blackboard. And I get so many positive comments from students about that, either because they just slept in late, or they're studying for the exam and want to re-listen to my lectures. Often I hear at 1.5 times speed, which I'm okay with. And there are ways then that students use that to make sure that they're still getting access to the material, even if they missed either part of lecture or just didn't get something I was doing in lecture.
We're actually going to be playing this back at 1.5 times speed for our listeners.
Excellent. I've heard my voice is angelic.
Is that right?
Yes, that's
great.
what I've been told.
That's we'll test it out. After 20 years, what still excites you about teaching?
You know what? Students are the same in many ways 20 years later, and it's weird to hear you say that because it doesn't feel like 20 years. I know when I started, my own kids were literally babies, and now they're going to college, so I guess it has been a long time. What I still enjoy about teaching is partly the learning for myself, is finding out things that are interesting to different generations of students. So I find myself using a lot more YouTube videos in class, certainly, than I was 20 years ago. The use of the cell phone in class, like with the hot seat stuff, totally different. But it's fun for me to look for new ways to keep engaging students.